Well, good morning, colleagues. Thanks for joining us on Thursday, on Earth Day. So great to have you here. Um, Boy, howdy, it's a good day in gradebook land. This is one of my favorite, I think, of the five of this series. And so I'm so excited to think about big thinks with all of you this morning. And I am terrifically excited because I do not get to co-facilitate that often these days with the amazing Keelan, who in the Hollywood Squares is directly to my left. Her shirt is the color of my background. So together, we are a set. And so I'm so excited to be here with all of you and also with the amazing Keelan. So if you don't already know me in my face, I'm Nicole Bryant Lescher. I'm English faculty at College of the Redwoods. I am just thrilled to be here with all of you. And I would love for Keelan to have a moment to introduce herself to you as well. If you don't know her, you should get to know her because she's amazing. Keelan, go for it.
Oh, wow. Hi, everyone. I do not know some of the faces here, so I'm really happy to see new faces and a couple familiar ones as well. I'm communications coordinator for 3CSN. I also teach English at Cal State Northridge. And I'm just, I always learn something in Nicole's sessions, no matter how many times I've been in them. So I'm really excited to be with all of you and learn with all of you today.
As our communications coordinator, Keelan is also the person who does a lot of work on uploading the videos. So when she says, no matter how many times I've seen them, she means that because she has seen them and then seen them in Syndicate. And so last spring, Keelan and I think were both having dreams of web sessions we had been in pretty much all the time. It was a little like being in the ether, but wasn't that true for all of us? All right, enough on that. Let's get rocking and rolling. So in the chat, there is a Google Doc. We would love to get to know each and every one of you a little bit more. And so if you would be so willing, please pop on over to that Google document. You're going to see this blue and white table up at the top. And what would be amazing is if you could pop your name and your college or colleges that call you and you call them home up on the left. And then take a couple minutes, if you would please, and complete the two columns that move to the right of that. The I got column is a place for you to take a moment and reflect and think about something that you bring with you today, some experience, expertise, past practices that can help enrich our learning community today, something you already know about either annotating, commenting on student work, whatever the no looks like for you, something that you've done before, thought about a lot, something that feels real central and part of your practice, or something you know or have tried related to creating a planned approach to giving student feedback. So what's something you got? As you're finishing that thinking on what you got and what you need, please think about two things. One, take a moment to look at the breadth and depth of our learning community, what other folks are bringing with them that you can learn from, and the other needs from other folks to norm your needs and also to expand what you're thinking about. Take a little, as my colleague Sarah Sullivan would say, a little gallery sit and look at what others have included on the table. And I would also have you think a little bit about this table as its purpose and what feels good for you. That last column to the right is an invitation for you to let us know at 3CSN if you would be comfortable with us sharing what you include in this table as part of our future communication out to the field. So Keelan and I and others within our group of writers and thinkers here at the organization create communication that goes out to the field intermittently, then we find that you all and your words and your experiences are a much more powerful way for us to think about what we're doing here at 3CSN than for us to say that about you. We'd rather you say it for yourselves through what we write. And so if you're comfortable with us sharing what you put here in those intermittent communications that we do, put a yes or a Y in that last box to the right. And if you're like, we appreciate that, but no thanks, not for me today, we want to make sure we honor that as well. So an N or no, make sure that the learning stays within our group, within this Google Doc, etc. Just want to honor your preferences on that. So here's the thing to get excited about. In our 5-part series, this is number 4, right? So the norms that are in blue are what I started with, and the ones in black are how much we have expanded this set of community values and agreements since our first session, and I'm super geeked about that. But also, I'm feeling that, one, I can't show them all on the screen at the same time anymore and zoom in for you, and 2, narrating all of these may feel like overkill for you. So what I would love for you to do is I'm just gonna start here at the top, and then in a couple minutes I'll scroll. But what I would love for you to do is just to read over what our existing community agreements are at this moment, to center yourself in the ways in which we've said we want to learn and be together, and also to think about how you can add to that additional ideas, values, approaches, ways of being that can help us be together and learn together in a more supported way. Just gonna hit that enter key as my invitation to you. If there's something that you're thinking about that you're like, oh yeah, let's yes and this, let's add to this list. If you feel so moved to do so, you can just type that right in on this Google document. If that feels a little bit too writing in the book for you at this moment, you can also put it in the chat, and Keelan or I can add it. If there's anything else you feel moved to add to this list of how we want to learn together, how we want to think about grading, supporting student learning through grading, supporting one another in this process, our list would be so excited for you to add to it. I'll move us forward with recognition that this is a living document. Sometimes those moments of clarity about how we want to show up with each other and what's needed to do that well don't always happen just because we happen to be stopped on that thing at the moment. So if there's something that you think of later in our being together and working together that you're like, you know what, this list needs this other thing, feel free to pop it in the chat just so that Keelan and I know that it's there, and either we can add it to the list or you can add it to the list, but that way our group remains mindful of anything else that we add here. And all of these practices that we're modeling together as part of our learning today sometimes are framed as the stuff that happens before the learning happens. But I would assert, and this comes from the learning I've gained from others, that that how we show up with each other and how we honor what other folks in our community bring to our learning together is in fact the fabric through which we learn, right? So giving folks an opportunity to name what they know and to set intentions for themselves in their learning, right? So that initial table, right? What do you want to, what do you already know? What do you want to know? And then inviting folks to help shape that way in which we learn with each other is not preemptive to the learning, but in fact, the tarmac through which really meaningful collaborative learning can happen. And so the more that I step into that practice with my colleagues, with my students, the more I notice when it's missing. And the more I notice the difference that that makes in the type of learning exchange we can have with each other, which includes in asynchronous spaces with my students. So if there's something about what we're doing today and modeling today that feels clutch for you, right? You're like, oh, I want to, I want to move that into spaces with my students, in my department, etc. Yes. And even if it feels a little bit squirrely at first, that's just habit, right? That's just muscle memory. It will become more natural in the way in which things happen, the more that you give it an opportunity and practice with it. Man, it's just a +1 to everything in terms of learning, as far as I'm concerned. It's super, super good for every learning community that I find that I'm working in. So I'm so glad that we're doing that together as we start our process of talking about what can be a really fraught topic, which is commenting on student work. So we're going to go there today. We're going to talk about that thing, and we're going to start our conversation with inquiry, right? Really thinking about how do we learn backwards, designing from the questions that drive our learning. And so you had questions in that table when you started, right? That were kind of, there's that burning itching idea again, right? But burning itching questions for yourself, right? That are driving what you're hoping to learn. And these were some of the hydrocortisone necessary burning and itching questions that have helped shape, my approach to what I want to model and show with you, so that you can see that relationship between where we go as learners together in some of that time where I'm driving the learning a little bit more. And you can see the questions that came from. So first, how can I use the annotation tools in SpeedGrader to communicate specifically with my students regarding their work? So knowing that this is one of the tools available to me in Canvas, what benefits does that particular tool have, right? In terms of the way in which I can communicate with my students about their work. And then how might the annotation tool be used successfully alongside other feedback tools? So for me, this is the bridge question that gets me from thinking about the role of annotating student work to thinking about the integrated approach I take to giving students feedback, recognizing that lots of approaches are great, but lots of approaches without an intentional frame for why I use them might make me feel really overwhelmed as a person who's giving feedback. And so just really thinking about, how can I become mindful of the moves that I want to make when I approach grading a particular project, and how might that help me to feel more solid in my footing when I'm giving feedback to students. And the question we always integrate in every one of these sessions, because I have so many negative faces to Canvas about it, and it's so critical that we talk about it so that you feel empowered to help your students. How do my students access feedback on assignments so that you can help them? They can see all that amazing feedback you're giving them. Together, we can be the glue that makes up for the gaps in the way in which Canvas works for our students related to feedback. So we'll get to that as well. So I'm going to pop us into welcome. We are in one of the sandboxes that I have access to. And today's an exciting day because there's several of my College of the Redwoods colleagues here. And so you all have access to this thing too. So I usually say I can, noodle around in here and it's not going to impact anything. But today it actually impacts, like 4 people in this session are going to get those weird Canvas messages that something has changed in a class that isn't a real class. So sorry about that. But thank you, Ruthie, because often Ruthie will come in here, or at least did last spring, and would become a test student in this class and leave comments on work. And that made my heart happy. There was someone in here other than me doing interesting comments. And so thanks. All right, so let's get around here. Let's do our thing. Here's an assignment, a pretend assignment that let's imagine I've assigned to my students, right? So essay on the brontosaurus because sauropods are cool. And if I look at this assignment, I can see that the type of assignment that this is, that I've assigned to my students, is an assignment where students are going to upload something. And that's mission critical for part of what I'm going to be modeling here, because the annotation tools in Canvas are only available if your students have uploaded something. It doesn't have to be an essay, okay? It doesn't have to be an essay, but it needs to be a file, right? It cannot, annotation tools are not available for students submitting a response as a response in a text box. It's not available for discussions. It is only available if you've created a digital Dropbox and your students are uploading something to it, right? So that what they upload could be a Microsoft Word file. It could be a PDF. So it could be in a field where, let's say, students are drawing a diagram, or they've taken a photo of something, or they've completed some sort of printed, back in the old days, you know, before we were a digital, sheet of some sort. And then let's imagine that they've either scanned that or they've used software on their phone. One of my favorites is Adobe Scan. It's a free app that you can put on your phone. You can suggest it to your students, and then they can take a photo of their stuff and they can turn that photo into a PDF. Keelan, yes.
You are getting a request to zoom in a bit or make the screen just a little larger.
Oh, totes my goats. Sorry about that. Okay, yes. Whoa. How's that? Good. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yes, there's other phone apps that do this too. Keelan, do you use Adobe as well?
I use the Cam Scanner.
Okay.
I like that one.
Okay. Yeah.
But
So Cam
I've
Scanner.
heard that Adobe is good. I might switch over, but I'm just kind of used to Cam Scanner. So once you start doing one.
Yep. And so the benefit for students is they don't have to have access to a scanner. And the benefit for you is if it's a thing that you want your students to submit and it's not a digital word processed document, it's way better to try and engage with that submission as a PDF than as a JPEG, right? Like it's so much clearer to see if it's a PDF rather than a photo that they're uploading. And so, you know, news to send out to the students if they're uploading something and it's not a word processing document. There's a lot of ways to do that. So they're going to upload something, right? If they're using a Mac, they're not going to upload dot pages because equals nothing happens, right? Cannot be seen, doesn't happen. So just a note to remember that you and your students, Mac and Canvas, they're not fully compatible with each other, and you would need to save that Mac document as something else. But let's imagine that I've got this thing, I've got this assignment, okay? If you were here with us last week, thanks for coming back. We talked all things rubrics. So one of the ways in which I'm going to give feedback to students on this assignment is through the rubric. So that's attached here for me. But let's say if in addition to that rubric, I want to give direct comments right on the submitted document, right? Whatever that might be. There's two different hallways I can go down to access that. So I can come to the assignment itself, right? So sorry to have to scroll, but since we're zoomed in, okay. I can go right into the assignment itself in the assignments tab. Why am I pointing at the screen as if you can see me? That was exciting. You couldn't see what I was doing. Let me use my mouse. I'll go to the assignments tab over here on the left. And then while I'm in the assignment, I can come over to SpeedGrader. If I click on SpeedGrader, that's a hallway that I go into to take action on this. Or I can go into my gradebook and I can access it that way. So if I come into my gradebook and I find this assignment, here we go. Here's the assignment. 3 buttons on the right up in the name of the assignment, or I can click where I would give a score. Both of these methods give me an option that's going to say SpeedGrader. So again, SpeedGrader is just a hallway I'm going down in Canvas, but it's a really important hallway. So I'm going to click on that word SpeedGrader. And it doesn't matter how I got there. If I get there through the 3 dots, if I get there through the arrow on the grade book, you know, where I would enter a score, or if I get there through the assignment page, all hallways lead to the same place, right? And so once I'm at SpeedGrader, I'll know I'm at SpeedGrader because I'll have a split screen. Okay? And so that split screen, which isn't quite evenly split, but I can adjust that if I want to, is present in everything that I'm scoring except a quiz. So when I'm doing discussion forums, I'm going to have a split screen. When I am reviewing student work that they typed into a text box, I'm going to see a split screen. And when students have uploaded a file, I'm going to see a split screen. The difference is that if students have uploaded something, in addition to the split screen, I'm going to see all of these tools available to me at the top. And that's exclusive to uploaded files, right? So it's like a hallway with an added bonus. If this is the type of assignment I've created for my students, then the reward I get as the instructor is an additional way to give them feedback. Okay. So if it's late at night one night and you're grading a discussion and you're, you know, wondering why that set of annotation tools doesn't show up at the top, that's not you, it's just late. Canvas is just not real clear about what it gives you when. So just keep in mind that your hallway has an additional bonus, like a cake in the middle of a table that shows up in the hallway when you have your students upload something. Here we go. All right, so let's talk about that cake a little bit. Let me zoom in for you so you can see. How's that? Is that looking good? Can y'all see that all right? Okay, great. All right. So I've done a couple things to be able to see where I'm going to give feedback a little bit more clearly. And one is to adjust this gray bar that is the split screen. If you've not already walked into the acceptance that owning a mouse is like mission critical while you're grading on Canvas, now's your moment, right? If you've spent the last year desperately trying to use your trackpad, no more, friends, especially with annotating. A mouse makes a tremendous difference on how easy it is for you to navigate here. One more second before I start showing you tools, let's talk browsers. If I'm going to annotate something, I really feel I should be in Mozilla Firefox is first and foremost. If I'm not going to be in Mozilla Firefox, I want to be in Chrome. I'm in Chrome right now. It works fine. But Mozilla is finer. There's a higher likelihood that when I click on stuff, it's gonna work. Sometimes Chrome, I click on one of these features at the top, it might not work. There's no good reason other than Flash. My understanding is that Flash is not as compatible with Chrome as it is with Mozilla. But I'm simply repeating what someone who knows much more about digital stuff has told me. I actually don't know that thing for myself. That's just, you know, I believed them. So Firefox, Chrome, solid, Safari, Internet Explorer, not so solid. There you go. Okay, so I've got all these tools up at the top. I can see my students' uploaded thing here. I can adjust the split screen with my little pullover over here. Okay, so I've just moved it over to make things easier for you to see. And then I've got all these tools. So the first tool that I want to show you over here on the right is this option to enter full screen, so you can make it even bigger for yourself if you want to. I find that when I click that, I forget that I'm there and then I have to like remind myself. So I'm not going to click that right now, but that's an option for you. The default tool that Canvas will select for you when you come into looking at an uploaded document this way is the pointy arrow, which is just a place where if you're like me, you're randomly clicking while you read. I don't know why I do that, but it is what I do. So it doesn't do anything. It's the I won't do anything on the page option, which is good, right? You don't want every time you touch the page for something to happen. So the little arrow is just, it's just your mouse, okay? And then there's tools that come to the right here where when you click on them, they're going to take action on this uploaded document. So to the right of the arrow is something that I think looks like a hot air balloon. If you click on that, it's a place to drop a pin. And over here on the left, you can see that Canvas lets you choose the color of pin that you drop. And so I say with love and hope, don't drop red pins. Please don't do it to your students. They see that color red and they're no longer listening to you, right? You could be saying with that dropped red pin that they are the most awesome human in the world, and all they're hearing is la, 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 red, it's bad, I've done a bad job, right? Stop, go forward no more, red. So look at all the other colors you could choose instead. I try and use something with high contrast. Canvas itself is not fully accessible in its color combinations, but I can't change that world, but I can decide that I'm going to choose something that's very, very contrasting in color. So black or dark blue. And then I can just use my cursor with my mouse and I can drop a pin anywhere I want. And because a pin by itself means nothing, Canvas says, hey, once you drop that pin, why don't you tell the students what you're noticing? Right. So when I'm giving feedback, using the annotating tools, I want to think about why I want my student to zoom in where I'm asking them to zoom in, right? Knowing I've got a rubric that I can give comprehensive, detailed feedback, right? The rubric's going to do that job for me. It's going to look at the different areas of learning criteria and tell students what moves they're making effectively in those different areas. So I don't need margin comments to do that for me. The rubric is going to do that for me. Okay. I also don't need margin comments to be the place where I'm giving comprehensive feedback, right? Kind of overall impressions. That would be a bit kind of logistically weird for a student reader because this pin is saying, look closely right here. So if I want to make overall comprehensive comments back to my students, I'm going to do that in the grade book, right? Outside the rubric, I've got this place where I can give comments. We talked a lot about that in session 2 about kind of overall feedback, audio, video, or written. And so I'm going to save those broader comments for that space. So what I'm going to use pin comments for is when I really want my students to see what I'm seeing in that particular spot, right? So I'm helping them to draw their eye in the same way I would if that student and I were sitting next to each other and I used my little finger and I said, right here, look right here. Okay? So I want to use those wisely if I'm going to direct their attention that specifically. And when I go to leave a comment, I'm going to think about that approach in the way in which I comment. So I'm going to start my comment for a pin with an observation, right? What is it I'm noticing? Because just because I've pinned it doesn't mean my students are seeing through my eyes. So I'm going to first say what I'm noticing, right? Then I'm going to include something that communicates why I brought their attention to that spot, right? So whether that's a suggestion of how to strengthen, whether it's a question that's an invitation for them to expand their thinking, right? So I'm going to start with an observation or a noticing. And then either a suggestion or question to develop their thinking further. Sometimes I'm going to drop a pin because they're doing something that's super awesome and I want them to know that it's awesome. I'm still going to use this format in that moment. I'm going to observe, right? I'm going to note what's awesome, but then I'm going to help them to see how they can use their own writing or their own thinking, you know, on the submission as a model to strengthen in other places, right? So they're paying it forward for themselves, right? Where I say like, oh, you're doing a great job explaining this here. Use this same level of detail when you explain X, right? Or whatever, so that they become their own models. for how to strengthen in places that you see. So the pin gives me an opportunity to direct my student's eye closely. And then I'm going to responsibly use that pin by first saying what I see so that my students are observing what I'm observing. So we're working with the same, as much as possible, level of vision about this piece of work. And then I'm going to add a suggestion or a question to help develop and strengthen their work moving forward. For me personally, the highlight tool works much in the same way. I find that I use the highlight tool when I want my students to see two different pieces of something interacting, right? Rather than using a pin, I can click on this highlight, again, choosing my color over here. And the highlight tool is great. I can just run my mouse right over it and it's going to highlight. So let's imagine I'm looking at this paragraph and I notice that there's an idea up here that the student is starting to develop. And then they just go down a think hallway, they redirect somewhere, and then they come back to their idea down here. I love using highlighting for this purpose. I can come in here, I can highlight a couple places in blue, I can highlight green in the middle. Oops. I forgot. If you highlight and then you change your mind on what color you want it to be, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to do two different colors, just don't move as fast as I did. And that way Canvas knows you're not trying to select the same thing. You'll know what's selected because it will make this little dashed line. You can come in the middle and make this green. And again, by itself, the annotation means nothing without me to decode it for my students. So I'm going to come over here. It gives me this little box on the right. If I click on that box, it opens a comment box for me. And the first thing I'm going to say over here is I've highlighted several lines to show a spot where I notice you are moving between two ideas. Okay. I not only do that because by itself, my highlighting, who knows why I'm doing that, but also because my understanding is that Canvas's annotation tools are accessible. But I just want to keep in mind that I might need to say that I'm highlighting just to help orient to what's going on. Keelan, what's up?
So Ruthie had a question. I don't know, Ruthie, if you wanted to ask the question or if you want me to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you waited because I didn't want to interrupt. But I noticed that you have said you don't have to make comments about the rubric. I don't use the rubric feature in Canvas, and I'd love to know more about how that works at some point in this training.
Totally. We covered rubrics in depth last week, and both the recording, no worries, the recording from last week, which was a phenomenal session, and the Google Doc are in your Google Doc today. So you have access to those and you know where I live. So worst case scenario, you can literally show up to my door and we will social distance and I will talk to you all about rubrics even more than that recording for you. But we're going to come back to that idea in this session a little bit more when we talk about making a feedback plan, because even though we're not going to go into depth on rubrics today, I think your question is really important, which is that idea of thinking about, like, if I'm not using a certain type of feedback, how do I think about what that might mean in terms of the other types of feedback I'm using, what that looks like in terms of my time and my commitment to something, right? How can integrating help everything go smoother, right? So like if I have a rubric, what don't I have to do here? And why might that be useful, right? Or if I choose not to use a rubric, what might I have to do more of here and for what reason? Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my students know what the rubric is, but they get it as a separate document.
Oh yeah. So then another thing that you could do is you can just name it here, right? So they get that as a separate doc. And if that's working really well for you and this works really well for the students, you could also say, you know, I made more specific comments about this on the rubric. Here's an example of it, right? So you could create basically a like a roadmap to get from the annotated comments to the rubric and reinforce that they look at the rubric. That would work also. Totally. So highlighting, to me, super useful for helping students to see something you see in terms of the relationship between pieces of something, right? So larger than a specific pin, more about helping them to zoom out 50 feet and look at the interrelationships between something. I start by noting I've highlighted several lines, and then I'm going to say something like, I would suggest combining the two blue sections and expanding the green highlighted section so that each idea has its own space or something like that, right? So here I'm trying to help my students to see like, oh, you were developing something and then you went left. And now that poor idea where you went left is just kind of hanging out there. Let's move it around, combine it a little bit more. So the highlight function works really well for that. Here's an example of that. Here says more of idea one highlighted in green. Looks like this might fit better with your earlier discussion of idea in one, also in green, right? So ways of using the colors to help your students see what you see in terms of progression of ideas. So after highlighting, the next option to the right is free text annotation, which sounds way more exciting than what it actually is, which is just a way to drop letters on top of their writing. And again, you're given a choice of colors that you would do. Again, recognize if you use red, then they're not reading what you said. They're reading their own subtext about bad, made from years of red pen usage in the past. So black or dark blue works really well here. And you can choose the size. So we're on that letter T, and I'm going to choose black. I'll do the smallest size. So I don't personally use this this tool much, but let's say that a student has used the wrong word, right? So it can be helpful for that. So let's say maybe they're writing something that is supposed to be an explanation or an analysis. Maybe there's jargon specific to their learning that they need to be using the right terminology. Those might be really good uses here where you can come in and write a word by dropping your cursor. Right above something and to make a note. For me personally, I use this pretty sparingly because I just want to think about what it means to rewrite students' words. For me, that makes me a little squirrely. I think sometimes students react strongly to that when they've written something and somebody else is rewriting what they've written. But there are particular situations where it's super helpful to be, dialed right in so they can see it's an issue of a word. It's an issue of how you've used something. And like all other features, oh no, I'm lying to you. This feature in Canvas does not default to giving you a comment box, but you can totally double up. So let's say you put a different word in and you're like, I want that there, but I also want to explain more. You can just come over to that hot air balloon pin, drop it right next to it, and get a comment box. So if you want to use that feature where you're adding text and then give a little bit more context, you can always use the 1-2 combo of dropping in the text and then having that pin drop.
So, oh, you just deleted a comment, correct?
I did do you want me to do it again?
Wendy was actually asking about that, so thank you for doing that.
Totally. So you click
Yes.
on it, you
Perfect.
click on it, and it's going to give you a trash bin. And then it will ask you if you want to delete it, and you can say okay. The trash bin, if it's a comment, shows up in the right. What's that?
I use that thing a lot because on mine, for whatever reason, it just starts highlighting like giant chunks of text. And then I have to use the trash can a couple times.
It's sometimes I find it's a browser issue. Like if for whatever reason, all of a sudden my browser has become less friendly with Canvas, the mouse won't work as specifically in the right spot. So similar to you, yeah, once in a while, like I'll be like, why aren't you working? And then I have to delete something. It happens. To the right of the T is an S, and S is for strike through. And so a strike through is exactly that. You can drag it through the middle of a word and put a line through it. Sometimes I find this is helpful if students have used a lot of words to say something and they could say that thing in 6 words rather than 12. I might use a strike through to pull through the center of a word. And I just use my mouse. I just drag it over top. Again, I've got my colors. Again, advocating for anything but red. And similar to adding in text, when I do a strike through, and I'm going to hit the refresh because strike through is being grumpy with me at the moment. I'll make this bigger again in just 1 second, folks. Okay, there's a highlight. Let's go to strike through. Let's see what we can do here. All right, let me show you one more time. If I do a strike through, unlike when I'm just writing text above, it's going to default to giving me a box. And that's a great reminder that it's important that I give some context for why I'm Xing out words in what the students have written. You know, always coming back to that idea that a student submission, something they've created, is going to feel personal. And so when we start, pulling things out from something that a student has created, that can be a real visceral experience for them. And even if it's meant to help, it's great to add some context so that they don't feel like their idea just got zizzed because you put that strike through on there. The paintbrush to the right is a pretty clumsy tool, but that's all right. Lots of different colors over here on the left, and then different widths. And so if you want to make a circle around something, you can do that. Wait for it. There's some life-changing artwork that's coming for you. Oh, look at that. Can leave them a smiley face. Yeah. There's not a lot about the paintbrush that's life-changing, but you did get that piece of art. One place where I do think it can be useful to use, let's say that your students have uploaded something that has an image or something that's a more complicated, multicolored submission. It can be useful to use the paintbrush because you can make a wide line and you can direct their attention in a way that's much more emphatic than some of the other pieces. So if there's something you really want them to zero in on, and for whatever reason it's not a white background with text on it, it's something more complicated than that, or let's say they've uploaded a PDF photo of some artwork they've created, and you really want to show that, and these other thinner tools aren't going to work for you, that paintbrush is a great option. Like everything else except the text letters, it's going to give you a box. So then you can, again, share what you're observing, share what you're noticing so that they're noticing what you're noticing, and then suggestions for how to strengthen or ways to think about this in relation to their overall work. The last feature I really like a lot. It's a box. It's a little gritty grid. And I like it because it's pretty, because I can come in here and it gives me like this plus sign that turns into a box. And I can box a piece of text or whatever. I could come up here and box this, a piece within this map that they've included, whatever it might be. And I like it because it's cleaner than my hand would be steady if I were using the mouse. And so I can box, whatever, 3 sentences, and it opens up a comment box for me. And so this is another great way if you want to bring students' attention to a couple different moves they're making in something they've uploaded, is that you can create a couple different boxes. You can color code those boxes different colors. And it's a way to say, hey, student, look right here, this thing right here. So Ruthie, your question about rubrics, I think one way in which your question could be answered is if you wanted to, you could, let's say you have a rubric with 4 different criteria, right? You could use either 4 different colors or just comments to note with each. And you could use these boxes, box around something that students have done and say, this is an example of whatever, criteria 1, or whatever, if you want to create that relationship between the rubric and different demonstrations of knowledge and skill that students are doing within their document. Great question from Mary in the chat. When students do peer review, do they have access to all the same annotation tools? My answer in a second is to turn that over to the group, because my initial answer is I'm not sure. I don't use the peer review tool in Canvas. I find it to be a bit challenging for my students to figure out how to use. So maybe, I don't know. Anybody use peer review in Canvas? I imagine that they do. Yeah, yes from Johnny, yes when I can tell. My students highlight, use pins, and leave comments. Great. Annotations on paper. Do you simply note to see feedback, or do you want to explain why and what has been annotated? With all the annotations on paper, do you simply note to see feedback? That's a great question, Carmen. That I think fits really well with the bridge we're going to make over to thinking about a feedback plan. Because I wanted to show you all of these tools, you're seeing a lot of annotating on here. I actually don't annotate this much on my students' work because I find that I don't need to. There's other ways that I can give them feedback. And if I put a lot over here, I think it's quite overwhelming for them personally, in part because of the interface in Canvas, in part because of what it looks like to try and see these comments, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. So I'll do a few annotations, and maybe one of those annotations might be make sure to look at the rubric or make sure to look at the overall comments. So I'm going to take us out of here and to the gradebook so that you can see how students see this. And then we will talk about feedback plans. So here I am in my class. And if I want to see what students see, all I need to do is go to the student view. It's going to turn the perimeter of my window purple, and that's how I know I'm in student view. Because I have made this as a baking show for all of you, I am able to show you what students see because I have gone into this student view and submitted assignments to my own assignments as if I'm my own student, which is a little being John Malkovich, but it works for our purposes here. And I think it's really good to do in your own classes so that you become more comfortable with using that test student function. Every one of you has a student in your classes called test student. That student is you, right? It's a place for you to practice with this stuff from the student viewpoint within your classes. And the only thing you need to do to access test student is to, come to that set of glasses that are up here on the right, your student view, and click on them. If you're in purple, you are your own student. Your own student. So then what you can do as your own student is you can go into an assignment and you can submit an assignment. as if you are a student in your own class. Then you can take yourself out of student view and you can grade that assignment wearing your actual live teacher hat. And then you can go back into student view and see what your students see. And it is an illuminating 20 minutes of your life, let me tell you. Because let's imagine you're in student view and you go to grades, right? So this is what your students see. Go to grades, this is what they see. Okay. Notice how all this stuff could be better explained with the hover, but it isn't. Thanks, Canvas. Right? In order for your students to make sense out of anything in terms of your feedback beyond seeing your score, which is the least supportive, least comprehensive type of feedback they receive, they have to take action. Okay? So Canvas's gradebook does not default to sharing all of that hard work you've done to give them feedback. It defaults to withholding that information, and students have to know how to go get it. So worry not. I have supports for you with this that are in our Google Doc, and I'll be sharing those in just a moment. But if you're wondering what that annotated feedback in particular looks like, the way that a student gets to that is that they have to click on the assignment, which they wouldn't know to do, right? But they would have to do that. And then even then, they have to know to go over here to this teeny tiny. This isn't just tiny because you're watching it on my screen. It's actually very tiny. This teeny tiny note over here on the right that says view feedback. And they have to click on that. And then they're going to get this pop-up that has your comments and your highlighting and potentially 45 minutes of your life if you've done a lot of margin comments. So other things I want you to notice. Notice it's a pop-up. Now imagine that you're a student doing this on your phone and you're trying to read this stuff. So lots more reason to advocate that margin comments are a thing you do as a part of a partnership with other feedback you give. Because if you spend hours going line by line and giving feedback in here, not only might that be overwhelming for your students to read all that feedback, but also situationally, it's really hard to engage with this. It's just not a great interface. So if you're having that moment where you're like, you just showed me all these tools and now you're making me kind of like meh about them, my invitation is to think about them mindfully. How are they mindfully part of a more comprehensive process of how students get feedback? So before you steep in sadness over what it looks like for your students to engage with the gradebook, here I am back on our Google Doc. The page after where we've been hanging out, page 7, over here on the right in the how-to guides, says Canvas, Nicole's guide for students to help them access grades and feedback. If you click on that and you open it, this is just swag for you and your students. This is a shareable Google document I made for your students. It is written for your students, and it is a step-by-step guide, including screenshots of how they can go into Canvas Gradebook and see stuff. Canvas produces one of these for students too. I made mine, so I like it better. I have included both for you. You may share whichever one appeals to you. I think mine's a little nicer to students. But every step of the way. And what I find is really useful about this is when I share this guide with my students, since I've numbered the steps, if my students are getting tripped up and they can't see something, right? If there's a particular type of feedback of mine they can't see, we can talk in numbers. And so I can send this to them in an email and say, go reread number 5. How to do the thing you need to see is under number 5. And so it just makes it easier for us to have a shared knowledge space to talk with each other when I'm not in the same room with them, when we're working asynchronously. So that's yours. It's right here. Take it, share it. You don't have to redo it. Just share it. It is there for your students. Okay? It is just there.
Well, you are getting some kudos in the chat from Wendy.
Heck yeah, man, just take that thing. all that hard work we do as feedback givers, because we care, we want to make sure our students can see it. Make sure that we can access it. Just because Canvas has decided to be wonky on that doesn't mean we need to be. Totally, totally.
Yeah.
I also make a video for my students.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, Wendy was saying that she loves the test students, a way of showing how to view the feedback. She is inspired to make a short video about it for the asynchronous English class this summer. Wendy, we will love to see that after you're done with it. That's exciting.
Absolutely.
And then she also said that she's going to borrow your written guide for students. Awesome.
Take all of it. Just take it all. Take it, change it. Right? It's how we learn in community with each other. So one more thing I want to direct your eyes toward and invite your thinking toward is on page 6. It's down beneath observing Canvas, and it really gets to those questions that were part of our discussion a couple minutes ago. So the question from Carmen, the question from Ruthie, right? Thinking about how to think about using or not using margin comments. And so what I want to share with you is something I created for myself a couple of years ago, and I've tailored it over time. But once I started working pretty consistently online in terms of my teaching load, I realized that I needed to say for myself how I wanted to approach giving feedback so that I stayed inspired, so that I made sure I wasn't a jerk to the second half of the students that I was grading once I was tired, so that I was really thinking about why I choose to use a certain approach to feedback over another and how I'm puzzle piecing those together, and to backwards link all of that to my teaching philosophy, right? So just to, in general, be much more intentional about why I'm doing what I'm doing when it comes to giving feedback. And so I share this with you just as an invitation for you to start. Why is this not getting bigger for me? Sorry, I want to make this bigger for you. Hold the line, please. I share this with you not to say this needs to be what you do, but to say, like, what might happen if you gave yourself a great cup of tea and 45 minutes to think about the moves you want to make when you're grading before you have to make those moves, right? Outside of the context of, oh my gosh, I've got 20 papers to grade before tomorrow morning. Like outside of that adrenaline space, what might happen if you gave yourself the creativity and the time to think about how you want to do what you do? And what might it feel like to have that plan that fits your teaching philosophy to guide you in future grading situations? So, so what you have here is literally what I do and the order in which I do it. And this looks super pretty now, but it didn't start this way, folks, right? It started on a piece of notebook paper of me saying, like, okay, what do I want to do every time I show up to grade? How do I want to be my best person? And what does that mean? And so it's a way for me to remind myself to be my best, even when I'm not feeling my best and grading is due, right? So the first thing I do personally is set my grade posting policy in Canvas to manual so that students don't see the action I've taken. They don't see my feedback till I'm done with everybody. And this makes sure that I can check myself through the process of those, you know, whatever, 40 humans, 35 humans, that I can decide that the feedback I've given is the feedback I want to give before anybody sees it, right? It removes the like just in time turnaround a little bit, gives me a bit more leeway. So there's a guide linked here for how to do that in my example. You can go down that rabbit hole and learn more if you're interested in thinking about how to change the way Canvas gradebook works so that you can pause, grade, and then release those grades. Personally, I read an assignment through once with a place to take notes, digital or paper, before I make any comments. So I do not use annotation tools the first time I read. Otherwise, it'll take me hours. And so I don't do that. I read the assignment through once. before I do anything, except make some notes to myself. And in case I'm not being my best self, I've basically said the same thing in 2 and 3. I remind myself again, like, do not annotate the first time you read, Nicole. And then I'm going to look over my notes that I've made to myself, and I'm going to complete the rubric. So the first place where I'm going to give students feedback, and they'll never know because they're going to see all that feedback together. But for me, the first place I comment is through the rubric. And over time, making this decision to have the rubric be the first place that I give feedback has also meant that I spend a lot of time making strong rubrics so that the rubric can do the heaviest piece of lifting for me. The rubric can be the place where I'm giving that sort of learning criteria by learning criteria feedback. It can be the place where if I've written it correctly for my purposes, it's also suggesting how they strengthen based on that learning criteria. Like, I want that rubric to do as much lifting for me as it can, because once I build it, that is commenting I can do on 35 people without having to say the same thing 35 times. So I'm going to read the thing through. I'm going to make some notes for myself. I'm going to complete that rubric. Then I'm going to look those notes over again, and I'm going to decide. I'm going to make a comprehensive, specific choice. I'm going to tell myself, you can comment 5 times on this student submission, Nicole. Where is important enough that it gets one? Up to 5. I just came up with that number. It's totally arbitrary, right? Maybe your magic number is 6 or 4 or 8 or whatever. But for me, I said, I'm not going to give myself permission to go line by line in here. I'm going to choose 5. And by limiting how much I can use the annotation tool, I find that I give really useful annotated feedback because I'm being really specific about my choice to do that. It's got to be a place where I really want students to zero in their eyes. So rubric, 5 or less annotated comments, and then I create a brief 1 to 2 minute audio or 5 to 6 sentence typed comment in the overall comments box. And then down here in my feedback plan, in addition to saying I'm going to make comments, I made a plan for myself of like what I'm going to do with those comments so that if it's 10 o'clock at night, I can remind myself how I want to show up in the type of feedback that I give. I'm going to reference the rubric. I'm going to reference my annotations. I'm not going to re-say what I say in those places, but in my overall feedback to my students, I'm going to say, hey, check out the rubric. I talk about this in detail here, right? Or don't forget to look at those annotated comments that are on the essay itself. Those are going to help with this and that. So I kind of head nod to them and I keep going. So I've made a plan for myself of how I want to go about giving feedback. And then after I did that for a couple semesters, I was like, oh, nope, I need a second plan. Sorry, this is how my brain works. But my second plan was, okay, I need to think about how I see my patterns as a feedback giver over the breadth of a large, complex assignment, recognizing that where I am, like literally how tired I am, how much work I've done, physically back in the pre-COVID days, like, am I in a hotel room trying to grade? Am I on a plane? Like, am I home? Is my toddler in the background? Like all of those things that might impact how I see that student submission and how I show up and respond to it. I want to try and just remain mindful of that. So after every 5 graded essays, I stop and I make some general reflection notes for myself. It's like 5 minutes. It's not huge, but I just make some notes. Like I notice where I see trends in student successes and struggles. That's probably going to turn into an announcement I give my students in the class, right? Or maybe something that I change in my rubric later. I note any trends or places of assignment disconnect, right? So I check myself. If I notice that, wow, all these students are struggling with this, I'm going to want to be mindful, like maybe they're struggling with it because I did a really bad job explaining that thing. Or the assignment was asking for one thing, but as a grader, I'm showing up expecting something else. So it gives me a chance to also look back at what I've built and think about places where it's not working well, where it could be strengthened. I'm gonna check in on my body and my state of mind. You know, how might my feelings be impacting how I'm grading, how I'm talking to students about their work. Check my environment. Is it loud? Are there distractions? Do I like my chair? These things matter. Do I like my chair too much? Sometimes that's bad, right? You know, and so after a few sets of 5, after I do this, if I'm doing this reflecting about every 5, then after I do this 2 or 3 times, I can look back at those reflections and see, like, am I holding relatively constant? I'm a human. My feedback's subjective. It's never going to be objective. But being mindful gives me more of an invitation to check what I'm doing and make sure that I'm not turning a blind eye to ways in which different groups of feedback, you know, different groups of grading, different packets of grading that I'm doing might be receiving a different version of me than others. I'm a big fan of taking walks in the middle of what I'm doing. Doesn't have to be long, a couple trips around the block makes me a nicer grader. But I share this with you simply to give you an invitation to start to think about what would feel good for you. And should you be so moved, look, I made you. Oh, yes, I did that on purpose. Let me model that a little more slowly. I made you a worksheet because, you know, graphic organizers make the world better. And so I made you your own worksheet so you could make your own feedback plan if you want to. So what I did is, if you click on this on the Google document where it says, what might your plan look like? And then you click on that, you're going to get oh, it didn't do it this time because I'd already done it once. You should get a pop-up that says, do you want to make a copy? And you just say yes. And then there it goes. Do you want to make a copy? And you say, yes, make a copy. And then instead of it being a Google document that everyone else is seeing and you're sharing, it's your own. It just made a copy right for you. And then you can change this, alter it any way you want. So I gave you an example at the top to look at, and then a place for you to do some brainstorming and thinking about a feedback plan that's going to feel good for you based on what your goals are with the feedback that you're giving. You know, what's your hope that will happen for students when you give this type of feedback? How do you want to do that? What method would make sense for you to do? And then if you're having a moment where you're like, how did you make a Google Doc turn into a copy? All the instructions and the screenshots for that are at the bottom of this sheet. Because, you know, that was kind of cool to do. Shout out to my colleague, Laurel. She taught me how to do that. So I've been talking at you a long time, longer than makes me comfortable. I don't want to talk at you anymore. I want you all to talk with each other. And so we do not have as many minutes as I would like, but I would love to be able to have you talk to each other for a few minutes. So could you please, I'm going to try and do math quickly, which is always a bad choice for me. Keelan, if we do groups of 3, will that mathematically work out? Oh, try one more time for me. Yes, yes. Okay, groups of 3. It'll go fast, you'll do what?
How many minutes, Nick?
Let's do 5 minutes.
Okay.
It's fast, y'all. It's fast, but we can do it. So groups of 3, we're going to zip you into a discussion room. Just process out with your colleagues. Just process out. If you can, if you're a group of 3, give each person in the group 1 minute uninterrupted to just share something they've gained, something they're thinking about, and then have a little discussion. I leave that up to you on how you want to go about that, but just make sure each person has at least 1 minute for their voice to be heard. And then we'll come back together. It's fast, but think aloud with others. It's way powerful. All right. Amazing, Keelan. Are you ready to whisk people? All right, y'all, you're going to be whisked with love. Go forth. We'll pull you back in a few. I have deep guilt about not giving you more time. Deep, Deep and rich guilt.
You should, Nick. Johnny was right in the middle of making an important point.
I will, yes, yes. There's no question about that. There's no question that that is what was happening. My guilt is not my way of trying to bring you back next week, but I will use whatever tempting, strategy I can to say next week is peer review. And there's a little bit where we talk about how to do peer review or to use peer review as a process in your classes. But it's mostly to give you all an opportunity to model some peer review protocols that work really well and talk to each other and share ideas. And so I will be a better version of myself next week by not talking so much, and all of you will get to talk more. 3 things, because I don't want to keep you, and I'm already keeping you. So 2 things are in the chat. Page 8 of our Google Doc, nothing but resources, tons of amazing things to read about giving comments on the margins, how students experience that. Like, it's a library. Just go get your hands dirty with it. It's wonderful. Page 10 is the video resources that are from previous sessions. So Ruthie, we got you right here, right? So all 3 previous Google documents, also full of resources, all 3 previous recordings. So those are here. Oh, now it's page 11. If you have time now, I'd love it. If you don't have time now, I completely understand. Maybe think about it for later. I've added a column to the right here called I got. If you have 2 additional minutes that you could devote to putting some reflection here on the right, you started with, this should not say I got, this should say, how about what's next? Or I learned. If you could add some notes over here on the right, you started with what you know, you added what you were hoping to know. If you can name for yourself and for Keelan and I, what you took away, what's next, what you're thinking about, what feels more solid, what you're inspired to. If you have 2 minutes to do that, Keelan and I will love you forever, which we will anyway. But we will love you extra, extra, extra Earth Day much if you would take 2 minutes to do that. And we have no judgment if you don't have those 2 minutes. We completely understand.
And we'll love you even more if you complete the SurveyMonkey survey, which is right here in the chat.
Correct. And in the
actually, also our bosses will love you very much.
That's correct. That's correct. Also, in the land of ways we keep dangling the love carrot for things that we're hoping you'll do, come back next week. Come back for the session that has its arms and its heart all around colleagues supporting each other through peer-to-peer support, through talking about how we do what we do and entering into those spaces of vulnerability, of how we might do with each other. Peer review is just such a gift we can give each other. It's a gift we give our students. And it requires a little bit of careful design to make it feel like a gift for everyone present. So come be in that think space with us. Same channel, same time, 10 to 11:30. Y'all are rainbows. Y'all are rainbows and sunshine. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks,
Have a
Nick.
wonderful
Thank you so much. Come back next week.